Resuming debate, the Honourable Member Cowichan Malahat Langford.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for recognizing me for tonight's debate on Bill S-205, a Senate public bill that is now before the House after a very long journey. It has gone through the Senate, and it is now before us for a report stage and third reading. And I believe tomorrow we will come to the consequential votes of this particular bill. Recently, of course, it has gone through 6 meetings at the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women, and it finds itself here via Senator Boisvenu and is now being sponsored in the House here by the member for Kildonan St. Paul. I also want to recognize another member, Madam Speaker, my NDP colleague, the member for Winnipeg Centre, who is a member of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, and who not only in her own riding, but indeed right across this country has been a stalwart champion for women and for raising these particular issues. And I know that our entire caucus is extremely proud of the work that she does on this issue every day. And we're certainly very grateful for the work that she did as our caucus member of that standing committee, so that the House can consider the committee's work on the bill that is before us today. Intimate partner violence, Madam Speaker, it is absolutely a national crisis, and we know the statistics outline that in very stark ways. About every 6 days, we know that a woman in Canada is killed by her intimate partner, and that is a statistic that is personally, of course, very troubling to me, being a father of 3 daughters. That is very personal towards me. Globally, before COVID, we know that 1 in 3 women experience some form of intimate partner violence. And we know that the rates are highest in households that are low income and Indigenous. There has been a surge in recent years in gender-based violence, including intimate partner violence. And we know that the number of women and girls in Canada involving a male accused increased by 27% in 2022 compared to before the pandemic in 2019. In fact, Madam Speaker, in recognition of this massive surge of violence, we know that the aforementioned Standing Committee on the Status of Women just recently undertook a study into this very important and concerning issue. We know that in several cities in Canada, the situation is so dire so that we have places like Ottawa, right where the House of Commons is located, and Toronto and Kitchener, which have recognized this as an epidemic. There is a role, of course, for us as federal legislators and for the federal government. We have jurisdiction over how the criminal code is structured, and indeed this particular bill has some important amendments to it. But we can't alone legislate ourselves out of this problem. And I think it is worth repeating here, as many of my colleagues have consistently done, that the current Liberal government has only implemented 2 of the 231 calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And I know that in my riding of Cowichan Malahat Langford, we have a relatively high Indigenous population there. And I know from speaking with many female Indigenous members of my community that this is a particularly galling statistic and one that they take great issue with. They feel that they are not being seen and that their personal circumstances are not rating high enough for this government's attention when we see a statistic like that. I also want to take some time, Madam Speaker, to recognize the organizations that are working on the ground in Cowichan Malahat Langford. There's Cowichan Women Against Violence Society, which works from a feminist perspective to provide a supportive environment primarily to women and children who have been impacted by violence. They are there to support diversity, change, choice, and growth through counseling, advocacy, emergency shelter services, community development, and education. And also we have the Victoria Women's Transition House, which since 1974 has been supporting and advocating for women. And we know that organization is active in the southern part of my riding in the great city of Langford. So when we turn, Madam Speaker, to S-205, there are a number of elements in this, and I do want to recognize that the bill is not in its same form as when the Senate handed it over to the House of Commons. I know that following those 6 meetings at the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, there were a number of amendments made to the bill. And I know that we do have some report stage amendments before us. We will, as a House, be deciding on what the final form of this bill we eventually want to have. But there are some notable elements in the bill, including mentions of the use of electronic monitoring devices, looking at, and I think some of the biggest parts of the bill deal with the recognizance orders that could be put in place for survivors of intimate partner violence, which allow judges to impose conditions on these or for a domestic counseling program. So, Madam Speaker, if we were to delve into the bill and look at those recognizance orders, first of all, I just want to say that, essentially, there's a lot of different examples in this bill, but it should be noted that the overall purpose is to prevent serious harm by imposing conditions on a person, which can ultimately restrict their behavior or their movement, and essentially is a barrier that the court can impose to reduce the risk of them committing a future offense. And we have to go back to the section 810 of the Criminal Code to find where there are existing provisions, and this bill is adding some amendments to those particular sections. So, for example, Madam Speaker, there could be an order to attend a treatment program. There could be an order to remain within a specified geographic area, an order to wear an electronic monitoring device so that the person's whereabouts are known at all times, an order to abstain from communicating, an order to refrain from using social media, and an order to abstain from the consumption of drugs and alcohol. Again, these all can vary based on the facts of the case before the court. Madam Speaker, I do want to say that, thanks to the hard work of the member for Winnipeg Centre, we as a caucus will continue to support this bill. We do believe that the provisions in this bill, the legislative changes, will have a benefit for survivors of intimate partner violence. It will provide in some of those legislative guardrails that are necessary. But again, we are not going to legislate ourselves out of this problem. This is one piece of the puzzle that we as legislators can have a positive impact on. But we do have a responsibility as a society to act swiftly and decisively to prevent and eliminate intimate partner violence and to support survivors. I think that S-205 on balance is a step in the right direction, but I think that many people who are listening to this debate and who have that lived experience would agree with me that the work is far from over and that we certainly must keep this issue top of mind. With that, Madam Speaker, I will conclude my remarks, and I appreciate being able to speak to this particular issue on behalf of my constituents. Thank you.